EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, July 20th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Melissa Villa-Nicholas, author of Data Borders, How Silicon Valley is Building an Industry Around Immigrants. And later in the show, Kyle Bailey at York University in Toronto, or of there, will be with us to discuss the rise of the far right in Finland. Meanwhile, Trump's legal troubles continue. Jack Smith reportedly seeking charges with a violation of a Reconstruction-era voter fraud statute. Civil rights protections. Interesting. In the hush money case, Trump's plea to move the trial to federal courts rejected. And in the E. Jean Carroll defamation suit, his request for a new trial also rejected. Biden meets privately with the UAW president ahead of a likely auto workers strike. Contract expires in September. Marjorie Taylor Greene shows Hunter Biden revenge porn images in a House hearing. Rumor. Did she check the ages for the people watching the House hearing? They could be watching on C-SPAN. RFK Jr. testifying today about, getting banned from Twitter, whining. Social media. 3 brave women testified in a Texas court yesterday about the personal trauma caused by the abortion ban, specific to their experiences. Meanwhile, blue state doctors ramp up efforts to ship abortion pills to red states. The appeal reports that children imprisoned in Louisiana's infamous Angola prison are being held in their cells for days without AC and 130-degree plus heat.
It's Angola prison. Named after Angola, after where slaves came, that is on a literally former slave plantation.
Yep. There's a lot of disgusting stories. They do essentially a competition for... We'll get to that after headlines. Another horrific headline, a 16-year-old Guatemalan boy died from an on-the-job accident at a poultry plant in Mississippi. It was illegal for him to be working there. SAG-AFTRA confirms it won't halt independent projects with studios like A24. The Republican Alabama legislature passes a redistricting map, still in defiance of the Supreme Court order. New York City settles with BLM protesters for a historic amount over police brutality. And lastly, Derek Chauvin, George Floyd's killer, asks the Supreme Court to review his conviction. My God. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. Have to acknowledge, of course, that today is the 3rd anniversary of Michael Brooks's passing. Michael would have turned 40 on August 13th, and that is a Sunday. We're going to be celebrating his life on Friday the 11th. Ahead of that, I just, when it's not just me hosting, we have the whole crew here. We figured that his 40th birthday might be a better time to recognize that. But Matt,
we wanted to move it to the birthday thing. I think David Griscom will be doing a Left Reckoning stream this afternoon on Michael's passing. Yeah, it's wild. And The Israel-Palestine stuff has had me thinking independently of like, oh, I wonder where Michael would be at, because he was already sort of leading the way, I think, on speaking forthrightly and modeling a way of actually talking about this in stark terms that it needs, and to the point where like his speech to that class on it went viral after his passing, and it's one of the things where I regularly think of where he would have been on it, but especially during the past week here. Yeah.
Did I ever tell you that was at my college too, Lafayette?
Oh, no.
It's like a weird coincidence, I guess. And I remember that because it was like the supermodel Hadid sisters, right?
Yeah,
that
Gigi
reposted
Hadid,
that.
I believe.
They're Palestinian. And that's it's amazing. He would have like, what would his reaction have been to seeing all that like
it would
attention?
Have been up there with the Lula attention. Like, I think honestly, especially just because of like what the mission was, which was to like get these sorts of things into a broader culture than just like a left culture. Well, when you have some of the main supermodels in the world reposting your comments on Palestine and how you be forthright about it, especially as Jews, like I think it's very interesting. Is very that's exactly what he would have wanted.
I can still see that clip in my mind with him in front of that chalkboard. I know that classroom too, and that was just such an epic moment for Michael. And even the stuff with Lula too. The fact that Lula is out of prison and back in power. I mean, that is just in and of itself something he would have loved. But
yeah, she posted it on Instagram as well, which is like even better.
The
than
medium
Twitter.
For her.
Exactly,
yeah, exactly. So anyway, rest in power as always, Michael. And you guys should read Against the Web. You should check out Sam's audiobook version of that. We'll put links to that in the descriptions in the show notes today. And of course, the Michael Brooks Show is still as relevant as it could be. So check out all that old stuff. Now, let's play this clip here of Biden. Biden spoke at the White House recently about the economic gains and some of the numbers that have been coming out about wage growth. Now we can mitigate and put some cold water on that, is in that we've spoken about how rental prices are absolutely out of control. And so in some ways, the gouging on that end is making the wage gains not as felt as they should be. But the reality is that for the most part, the declining inflation, the increases in wages, unemployment remaining consistently low, these are, for standard White House reporters or people that cover politics, good numbers on that front. We've played clips of Fox News basically saying, well, unemployment could be lower. It's at really low rates right now. Like, we're talking lowest it's been in years, if you don't mind looking up the exact year, Bradley, of that. But this is Biden speaking about some of those dynamics at the White House and talking about the Fed's basically aggressive interest rate hikes and diverging from them, which is quite interesting because I don't know if you would have seen this 10, 15 years ago when Larry Summers was the most important voice in Obama's ear, for example, on this front. But here's what he had to say.
For example, over the past year, we've seen dramatic decline in inflation. It dropped by 2/3 down to 3% at a time when unemployment has been below 4% for the longest stretch in 50 years. I've rejected the notion that the reason for inflation is the only way you get inflation down is reduce employment and or reduce wages. Remember, the experts said to get inflation under control, we need to lower those wages and drive up unemployment. But I've never bought that. I don't think the problem in America today is too many people working or working people are making too much money.
Well, the problem, though, Mr. President, is that the head of the Fed, who you kept on, Jerome Powell, from the Trump administration, does not agree with your assessment. Biden hasn't always felt that way. That's not a true statement there by him. However, the fact that he's saying that is a marked improvement for the Democratic Party. There's no other way to slice it. The problem is that in practice, that's not what's being implemented, because as much as Biden has like improved on the substance of understanding that the connection between labor and employment, inflation and employment is not what like Milton Friedmanites and these Fed orthodox thinkers have been pushing. Essentially, he's come to the conclusion that that's a myth, which is true.
Yeah, it's not experts. It's Larry Summers.
Right.
But not Larry Summers. It's your Fed chairman, Jerome Powell.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. That's the problem here, is that I'm very encouraged to hear that. I mean, this is what progressive economists have been saying for years and years and years. And yet you can't find anybody within the Fed leadership that doesn't in some way subscribe to that notion. So Biden is showing progress on this front. The problem, though, is that eventually these rate hikes, where they were essentially at zero in the midst of the pandemic, being raised 10 different times to over 5%, which is the highest that it's been since, 2007? And in terms of the unemployment numbers, it's the lowest since 1969. So again, thank you for looking that up, Bradley. Those metrics are very good for the president's resume, essentially. But the effects of this are going to be felt. It's just a matter of when. And the problem is that Biden, despite believing this, is still too committed to notions of bipartisanship that are immensely outdated. And that is superseding his evolution on that. And Jerome Powell should have been gone day one when Biden got into office. But unfortunately, that did not happen.
Yeah, I mean, Harold Meyerson has a piece in the American Prospect, but it's basically on like Biden's economy and how it's been good for people at the low end of the wage scale. They've experienced wage growth through like the tight labor market. And I think that's important to note as people like try to say like there was just it was just all negative. I think like it shows the stimulus during the pandemic was good and that sort of stuff. But the problem is, what if there's a recession?
Yeah.
Right? Like this stuff is fleeting. I'm glad we got back to normal before COVID, but guess what? Bernie Sanders didn't have success in the 2016 primary because of the COVID economy. It was because of the normal standard economy that we're celebrating are getting back to normal on.
Yeah.
And so like I'm glad that there's been a little bit of wage growth, but to me, like the idea that it's enjoyable by anybody that's lower income, like they have to look at rent prices or other things like that are actually still inflated despite the overall numbers going down. Like I think people are really out of touch on
it's the same usage of the metric of like GDP, that as if that has any effect on, or its effects are felt in any way on a day-to-day basis by the average worker.
And so like I'd say the economy is really good for the rentiers that were in control of the economy before COVID-19, and it's been moderately okay for some of the working people, but I don't know how durable those gains are.
Exactly. Durability is the key, right? If these things are not put in place by Fed policy or really
ProAct, something like that,
they'll change due to market forces, right? And part of the problem here too is that the Senate brain that was embedded in Biden's decision to keep someone like Powell on is the same Senate brain that doesn't get rid of the filibuster, which is a huge reason why our fiscal policy is outsourced to the Fed, when much of what we could do to combat inflation would be clawing back all that money that's being hoarded and not spent by the wealthiest in this country, because we've done tax break after tax break for the top 1.01%, whatever the case may be, through offshore tax havens, through loopholes. They've gotten richer and richer and richer, and that is a much bigger driver of inflation than anything in the labor market. It's oligarchs hoarding wealth and not putting that money into circulation in a way that like makes the economy more robust. So because we have been unable to get rid of things like the filibuster because of Senate congeniality, that is what is the systemic driver of some of the dynamics that we're seeing right here. We should be having much more robust financial policy. The power of the purse is supposed to be through the legislative branch, and it is not that way anymore because of political corruption and because of institutionalism that should have been done away with a long time ago. With that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Melissa Villa-Nicholas on her book Data Borders. We are back, and we are joined now by Melissa Villa-Nicholas, assistant professor in the Graduate School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Rhode Island, author of Data Borders: How Silicon Valley is Building an Industry Around Immigrants. Melissa, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So, the term data borders, how do you define it, and what are the best examples that our audience might recognize immediately, like in our everyday lives?
Well, I really define it by starting to think about our borderlands, specifically the U.S.-Mexico border, and what it feels like to live in a borderland. And that's a really specific feeling. There's hybrid cultures and people sort of experiencing each other's culture, tension and friction. But then when we move to data borderlands, we really don't feel it, but we're always at the edge of it. So we're always at the edge of it through data and our digital entrances with technology. People might be most familiar with the company's Amazon, which Amazon holds a large amount of data for ICE, for the USCIS. And this is how we sort of enter into data borders, is through our consumption and our relationship with these companies that have huge contracts with ICE to hold immigrant data. So hopefully that sums it up. But yes, there's many, many companies that have those contracts with ICE.
Melissa, just quickly, I think your mic's against your hair or your shirt or something. Just there we go. It happens all the time. Don't worry about it. So like some of these contracts, some of these companies that you mentioned Amazon. I know Palantir is infamous, obviously. Give the audience a sense of some of these like public-private contracts with some of these Silicon Valley companies.
Sure. So ICE might hold a contract with a company like Palantir, which do consumer and defense contracts. Palantir will build databases for ICE, a database specifically called Gotham and other databases where they hold folks' data so that different law enforcement can access that data and find those folks. And most notoriously in the past, Palantir has built databases for policing, for predictive policing in cities like New Orleans and Chicago. But really what they're doing is they're building out of data, sort of data mining, and how to data mine folks that they want to surveil more, such as immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because so many of the technologies you describe, I feel like we talked about them within the context of like the Black Lives Matter protests in particular, and just as examples of the police state. But you see how the police state is not just local policing. It's on this federal level, and in an increasing manner, it's being deployed as surveillance, whether through things like biometric data, retinal scanning. You talk about, even DNA, to surveil migrants or people living here in kind of an inherently precarious position.
Right. And my concern really is biodata because it's so valuable and there's such a fuzzy area with who owns that data. So immigrants often have to give many different types of biodata, their fingerprints, their face scan, their DNA samples. One of the most notorious examples recently is the CBP1 app, which is being used for all refugees trying to get across the US-Mexico border. And immigrant rights groups have voiced concern because that requires a face scan. But again, there's this opaque line of we don't know where that data goes, who has rights to it, and how much of the immigrants that are trying to come over the border have their rights to their own biodata.
Certainly. I mean, I would think that there could be a pretty strong case about these these scans violating rights to privacy if they're deployed essentially as just surveillance in everyday life. I mean, what are some of the examples? I know you spoke to a lot of people about their experiences with the immigration police state and in connection with Silicon Valley. What were some of those stories that our audience might be interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of people who came here undocumented and their surrounding family members. One thing that I thought was interesting was that a lot of people are quite familiar with the technologies being used in the detention centers because they talk and they hear from each other. So one thing that someone said was that they used heat scanning to scan body, like anxiety, to be able to sort of see how people are feeling, which of course is quite normal with data and surveillance, is surveilling feelings. And a lot of people in that community were concerned that as they crossed through borders, they were being sort of scanned, like heat scanned. There's a lot also examples just of DACA students who feel like they've given over a lot of data that they can't necessarily get back. It's just sort of in the government's hands now, all of the data of how they came here and who they're related to. So it kind of goes far and wide. And then, of course, when folks did cross over, they experience very intense forms of surveillance. And it makes the actual physical border at the US-Mexico border more dangerous. Sort of the more technology and more surveillance, the higher the stakes. So that whole crossing experience is even more dangerous.
I mean, to say it's more dangerous, given the news of this week, where the whistleblower spoke out about the orders to throw children into the Rio Grande and these barrels that are cutting people up and killing them because they're wrapped with barbed wire. I mean, those are the stories that I think get people, or at least people with consciences, to balk and to have this emotional reaction. But the constant anxiety of feeling like you're just a second away from being ripped away from your community and from your home, that you came here to this country for whatever reason, to meet up with family, to flee a bad political situation. That is the kind of generational trauma that I feel like we're going to need to contend with as a society.
Right. And then to link that to data, I mean, we have, unfortunately, I feel like Texas and Florida trying to one up each other with how they treat immigrants. But immigrants come here to build lives and to build better lives. So then as their data is stored and they aren't necessarily given specific data rights, those futures that they're trying to build might be hindered by that data. And that happens to a lot of folks, especially underrepresented folks in the US who are already citizens. Like their data may or may not get their home loan approved or get them certain insurance. So the idea that immigrants are coming here for a future, for different lives, and then they have their data already going out in front of them, deciding where they might or might access, is a concern to me as well.
Absolutely. When did this relationship between some of these Silicon Valley companies and ICE and DHS really start ramping up?
It's interesting. I think as data consumers, we see or experience like things that are actually happening 10 years ago. So they started to find that Palantir was doing predictive analytics and predictive crime analytics back in 2010, but really didn't find out about it until like 2015 or later. So we unfortunately find out way later what has been going on. But really, it feels like around 2010 and on, there was more of a growing relationship between the Department of Homeland Security and Silicon Valley, and sort of a switch from relationships with Boeing and Lockheed Martin, that are usually the ones who build defense, to this pitch from the Department of Homeland Security to have this sort of Silicon Valley innovation around surveilling underrepresented populations, specifically immigrants. So I think through the 2010s, and then with the Trump administration, we started to see bids for what they called this smart wall. And it was an alternative to a physical wall, which we remember the Trump
which Mexico did not pay for. Yes,
right.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the digital wall is more of a, it's politically Democrats and Republicans support it, but there are dangers there because it's holding folks' data. It's locating folks, of course, through location, through their social media. So we see Department of Homeland Security sort of ask for different companies in Silicon Valley to pitch projects on hardware along the US border and AI and different databases to really surveil immigrants. And that was sort of through 2016 on, and just kind of continues. Now we have a company called Anduril that had its beginnings in Oculus. They're purely defense now, but they generate ideas like drones and night goggle visions, and it's sort of the same zeal of Silicon Valley building video games or any kind of new technology, but around surveillance of underrepresented people.
And how, when that data is collected, can you talk about how that gets deployed on the local level, essentially sold to some of these local law enforcement agencies, and basically making it incredibly profitable for these companies because they are creating a profit for themselves with ostensibly like federal surveillance efforts, but it's just because of the private contracting element.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems, is that data of immigrants becomes a product, and it becomes more and more valuable between these companies and ICE. One example is just social media data. In the past couple of years, deportation started to happen really specifically, where ICE would show up in really specific places that they couldn't have known about without a sort of location services and triangulating social media. So they were definitely tracking people through their social media. We also have companies like LexisNexis, which I'm concerned about, and librarians specifically are concerned about, and lawyers and all kinds of folks who depend on LexisNexis, because they hold contracts with ICE too. And so they hold the data and also give ICE access to what you would assume is private data through their data banks to surveil folks. So that's become an increasing problem for folks like librarians or lawyers who have a conflict of interest if they have immigrant patrons or clients and need to use LexisNexis, but LexisNexis actually holds contracts with ICE. There's no ethical way around that with working with the public as librarians specifically.
What does their contract entail?
It's to access people's data. So LexisNexis, for anyone who has a driver's license and feels secure about looking for your own data, everyone has a right to see their data ID in LexisNexis. So you can go up to LexisNexis and search for how to get your data ID. LexisNexis essentially holds data of a lot of the population. I searched for my own data ID and got about 70 pages about myself that they had been gathering. So I can guarantee your listeners, if they feel comfortable doing that, we'll also get a large packet because our data is quite valuable in large amounts, and LexisNexis buys and sells that data. So for something like LexisNexis, who gathers a lot of data and who had traditionally been a database builder for us folks with library backgrounds, we teach databases, we teach students how to search databases for their patrons. They also give ICE access to people's private data. And that's the problem here for many of us, is that our data is lending itself into these large networks that are also contracted with ICE.
I'm sticking on this because it's just so shocking to hear about, but like, what does this, how is it possible that there's 70 pages on you? I mean, what information could possibly be in there, like just generally for other people if they want to look this stuff up?
Yeah, it was all of my previous addresses, probably like every email I've ever had, a lot of personal information. I feel like I'm a citizen with privilege, and so they have all of this, and I never gave them the authority to gather it, but they just can and do. But for folks who don't have rights to citizenship, it's so much more vulnerable to be able to access everywhere that they've gone. So LexisNexis, like a lot of these big data companies, they buy and sell that information from other companies, and LexisNexis specifically, and also Elsevier, the publisher Elsevier, they have a net worth as big as Google, and that's really from data purchasing and selling. So there's a conflict here, because then they have access to anyone's data and they can give ICE access to anyone's data. It also becomes difficult because these companies like LexisNexis, Palantir, Anduril, they're private companies. So they won't give the public access to the behind the scenes of these databases or infrastructure because it's their own private databases that they've built.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the real difficulty in the public finding out how our data moves together for purposes of surveillance of immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, it really is amazing how ubiquitous this stuff is, and things like, this is such a specific problem, but in my old job I had to travel a lot, and I had a TSA pre-check, right? But now everyone has that, and so it doesn't give you much of an advantage. But the clear aisle is the one that you're supposed to sign up for, and that's hundreds of dollars. But that's just another private company collecting your retinal data, right. And I don't want to do that. But there seems to be, even in the reckoning of what we all I guess reckoned with in the NSA documents that were leaked by Snowden, and our kind of broader understanding about what the surveillance state really meant in a post 9/11 world. There's the privatization element, as you write about, has just ramped up, and it's particularly being used at the border and for migrants within the country in the most problematic ways imaginable.
Right. And it's a difficult trade-off. We always find ourselves trading off, like you said, am I getting in my face scan so I can get to the front of TSA and get through customs faster? And that's what folks at the border are also experiencing with the new CBP One app, which, if they can even get through the app errors so often, which is how much data am I going to give over, and where is that going to follow me once I get in through refugee status? And so that's the concern, is how much of our rights are we giving over, and how much rights do immigrants have to their own private biodata specifically, because that is so valuable. A lot of DNA held together is quite valuable. I also think about, like, we hear quite often the writer's strike and the actor's strike. They have their own concerns with AI and having their image reproduced. So I feel like we can see folks that we kind of think are like at the top or have these really great positions, and they're fighting for their own privacy rights to data. So we can imagine, and what I'm concerned with is how undocumented people have the right to their own data as well.
Well, they are stripped of every other right, seemingly, to exist in this country. So it's very, very dark, but fascinating stuff. Melissa Villa-Nicholas, assistant professor in the Graduate School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Rhode Island. The book is Data Borders: How Silicon Valley is Building an Industry Around Immigrants. Melissa will put a link to your book wherever people are listening to this or watching, and at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, guys, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about Finland with Kyle Bailey. We are back, and we are joined now by Kyle Bailey from Helsinki. Well, he's in Helsinki now, Ph.D. candidate at in the Department of Politics at York University in Toronto. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's fantastic to be here, Emma.
So I gotta say, I am Finnish. I have family still in Finland in kind of like the southwest area. Pori and. I'm not sure if you know Sikanen, but like I went there and visited there when I was 13. But there were a few other cities where my family is, but I don't remember. Anyway, it's beautiful, and I would love to go back at some point because I still have like cousins and stuff in Finland. But not a great time right now for Finland in terms of the election results. Man, like for our audience, so. Last, I would imagine a lot of people heard about leadership in Finland was Prime Minister Sanna Marin and her, videos of her dancing with her friends, which was so outrageous. But her center-left party has lost and came in third in April in the elections, and that's given rise to a right-wing government in Finland. How did that happen? How did she get ousted? Despite like the left within the context of Finnish politics being incredibly strong historically.
Well, there's kind of like a wider backdrop to this, It seems almost banal to say it at this point, but what we've been living through for the past decade or more is basically a multi-dimensional crisis of neoliberal global capitalism. So in the years from the 2008 global financial crisis until the global COVID pandemic, we've seen all kinds of morbid symptoms of this crisis. We've seen growing economic inequality and social exclusion. And, that's been exacerbated by a decade of austerity, including to some extent in the Nordic countries. We've seen the rise of populist leaders who are openly disdainful of globalization and the growing centrality of the climate emergency. And, one of the biggest trends in this crisis has been the waning of the so-called neoliberal center, the centrist political parties in Europe and elsewhere. So whereas at the core of this kind of neoliberal project during the 1990s and 2000s, which was really epitomized by Clintonism in the United States and third way social democracy in Britain and Europe, at the core of this was really trying to lock in and kind of constitutionalize neoliberal reforms in all these different countries. But since 2008, that kind of politics has been waning a lot, so much so actually that now these centrist parties are finding it harder and harder to square the requirements of capital accumulation globally with the interests of the populations whose votes they need to stay in power. And, unfortunately, the fledgling kind of socialist left that we've seen grow up hasn't been the main political beneficiary of this waning neoliberal center. It's been the far right, and that's kind of what we're seeing today. That's like the wider context for things in Finland as well. You have this kind of dialectical double act, like a double act between this declining neoliberal center and a rising far right. And we're seeing in all the different countries of Europe and further afield, all the different possible combinations that kind of double act can take.
So the election results, right? The National Coalition Party came in first, then the Finns Party, which is the far right, very scary party, and we'll talk about them in a second. And then Marin's Social Democratic Party finished in third. Now, just take us through that election in April, how that shook out, and then eventually the coalition formed by those top two parties, the center-right party and then the far-right party.
Well, I mean, there was coalition talks that seemed sometimes quite fraught, but you saw a meeting of minds, and really what we've ended up with this government is it's basically a coalition of a neoliberal centrist party, the National Coalition Party, and the far right. So basically a coalition of far right racists and their neoliberal enablers. So I mean, in the government coalition talks, the True Finns, which are a far right party, they spent most of their time trying to get anti-immigration reforms included in the government program. So these are things like higher income caps for foreign workers, stricter guidelines in order to acquire Finnish citizenship, and they wanted to reduce drastically the number of refugees Finland takes. And several Finns ministers have made absolutely no secret of their overt hostility towards immigrants. Like you said, this is a quite scary party in many ways. So they're overtly hostile to especially black and brown immigrants. They've got far-right affiliations and also pro-fascist and pro-Nazi sympathies. So to give you a couple of examples, the Minister of Economic Affairs, Wilhelm Junnila, he narrowly just recently survived a vote of no confidence, but then he was forced to resign soon after it was revealed, among other things, that he'd been a speaker at a rally organized by basically violent Nazi thugs, like a veritable who's who of neo-Nazis in Finland, including the now banned Nordic resistance movement. So I mean, that's just one example.
He said
There's
he
others.
made multiple jokes about Heil Hitler. Multiple jokes about that. And he was also, I think, what I read was that he made comments as well about promoting, quote, climate abortion in Africa, meaning saying that we should give abortions to Africans to combat climate change. So we've talked about eco-fascism within the context of it, kind of catching up in the United States. Some of the rhetoric, it's just much more robust right now in Europe, but we're going to see an importation of it, I'd imagine. Really scary stuff for one of the top ministries in Finland to be led by that guy, at least before he was forced to resign.
Oh yeah, certainly. And everything's always a joke with the Finns party, and of course it's not a joke. Let's go through a couple of other Finns ministers. So you see Halla-aho, the former Finns party leader, and now the Speaker of the Parliament. This guy is a militant, an unapologetic racist. This is someone who thinks that Islam is a religion of pedophiles. This is someone who said that Somalis have a genetic trait to rob and steal from people. This is someone who's even said things like that he thinks, wouldn't it be great if pro-immigration female MPs were raped by foreigners? So I mean, this is the kind of stuff.
And he's the Speaker of Parliament now, right? And he's a part of this Finns party, right? This is the party that came in second for people still following the far right party and a part of this coalition.
Yes, he's the former leader, and he's an ideologically influential person in this parliament, in this party, and he's now the Speaker of the Parliament. Yes, and the current Finns party leader, Riikka Purra, is now the finance minister, and she's also in the past made a whole host of racist and even violent comments against immigrants, including on Halla-aho's blog. So I mean, this is at least one half of the story with this government, far right racism.
So they now hold how many ministry seats? The Finns party.
Well, they're the junior partner in the coalition, and this brings me to the other side of the story. Not just far right racists, but they're neoliberal enablers. So the party which formed the coalition is Petteri Orpo's National Coalition Party, and this is a party that's championing, committed to an extreme neoliberal austerity program. So this includes, for example, what's in the government program right now includes like 6 billion euros worth of cuts over the next parliament to health, education, and welfare, including cuts to unemployment benefit, to housing benefit, and to social assistance. And I mean, that's one side of it, cuts. But this government program also includes a number of direct attacks on the Finnish labor movement. So, for example, these range from a very unpopular measure to make the first day of sick leave that workers take unpaid, to things like restrictions and fines for workers who engage in sympathy strikes and who engage in wildcat strikes. Things like this. It's a very extreme program in many ways.
And so it's just the worst marriage possible. You have Nazis and anti-worker, pro-austerity measures working together as a part of this new government. And I guess that does bring me to the party that came in third, the Social Democrats. What is your take on where they drop the ball here in advocating for their party to continue to hold power?
Well, I mean, you can kind of see when we're looking even now at reactions to this kind of new government from its more kind of welfare nationalist economic policies towards an austerity program that can be expected to hurt their own voters in the end, and the National Coalition Party in turn being dragged towards some far-right social policies. I mean, if we look at the broad reactions to this, like on the broad left, we can see both some like prospects and pitfalls going forward. So to address your question, I mean, a lot of the like liberal and center-left responses to the government, they've focused a lot on like the damage that racist ministers are doing to Finland's international reputation and kind of like progressive veneer. but in some ways they don't go very deep. Like on the one hand, they don't necessarily even address the government program, and like especially the austerity parts. In addition to the racism. So I mean that's one thing. The Social Democrats have tended for the last decades to have kind of in their own way embraced neoliberal economic reforms as well, and we've had governments in Finland that also include centre-right parties as well that have kind of been part of this neoliberal consensus in Finland, which has been more like moderate than in some other places like Britain or the United States, but has nevertheless been very real. So I mean that's one thing, but then there's also some questions about like the even the further left groupings, and I don't know what kind of questions you want to ask, but maybe we could also consider some of the actual left-wing responses as well.
Sure, I go ahead if you don't mind expanding.
Yeah, so for example, there's like at least some good prospects for like challenging this government. Like we've seen some quite good early small-scale protests outside of the Finnish parliament, which is promising in terms of building a wider movement to challenge this, especially if the left can kind of join up the different fragments of all the groups that are interested in protesting this new government, which is quite broadly unpopular. I mean, that's one thing. Another thing is that the assaults on the labor movement also open up the possibility that the trade unions will take action. And for example, it's not impossible to imagine at least a one-day general strike in the future. And it has some precedent in Finland. So I mean, that's something. But I mean, there are also a lot of issues that even on the left we sometimes struggle with as well. So, like for example, when we're talking about the causes of far-right racism and what's actually driving it, sometimes we talk about austerity on the left, but we don't necessarily go deeper to talk about the forces of capitalism and globalization that are also driving the working class into misery, and also now driving a significant portion of the middle class into misery as well, and creating a base all around Europe and in North America and elsewhere for these kind of far-right racist parties. So I mean, like let's take one example. Like the European left in general has historically and now, and especially since Brexit, it's had more and more trouble separating kind of the wheat from the chaff when it comes to thinking about the European Union. So, for example, most people on the European left tend to point to things in the EU like its defense of international human rights standards and things like the free movement of labor. But if we really look at the EU, that's not really the core of the project. Like the core institutions are the European single market and the common currency, the Eurozone. And what these have kind of represented in relation to all these neoliberal governments we've had in Europe is a thoroughly like anti-democratic project of locking in neoliberal reforms in the interests of capital and big business. So I mean, one thing going forward that the left really needs to do in order to get at these deep structural causes is separate out the aspects of the European Union that support capital, free trade, and globalization, and those which support workers, because the free movement of workers in the EU, which was so important in the Brexit referendum. I mean, surely that's an end in itself and something that's important in itself, and not just as a complement to the free movement of capital. So what we need to do on the left is oppose the international mobility of capital while supporting the mobility of labor and the institutionalization of workers' rights and power. So I mean that's a kind of thorny issue for the left as well going forward.
Great points. I would imagine though that it's an interesting dynamic because Finland is such a small nation that the resistance to those kinds of forces, once these like neoliberal interests get a foot in the door, must be quite difficult given like the power of the capital on the other side. And I guess that brings me to just my next question about the threat that this new coalition that is much more sympathetic to those forces, what is the threat to the lauded and honestly robust by particularly American standards modes of social safety within Finland in terms of like, you know, having one of the best education systems in the world, having having labor laws that are so much more tilted towards workers that they have engaged in something like a general strike before, which is something so foreign to us in the American context. Like, if you could just give us a sense of some of the social programs, how successful they've been in Finland, and how they might be under threat with this new government.
Well, I mean, Finland over the course of the 20th century, following in some ways the example of Sweden, but also setting in others its own course, built up a comprehensive and quite surprisingly, even by European standards, universalist welfare state that was really based on a kind of the idea was a class compromise between capitalists and workers, but also rooted and backed up by significant power on the part of labor. But I mean, especially since from the 1970s and 80s and through to the recession in the 1990s in Finland, these things have been slowly eroded and chipped away at. And so, for example, Finland's had one of the fastest rising rates of inequality in Europe, and it's the fastest rising because it starts from a relatively low level, right? But the direction of travel is still quite clear because, you know, after the crisis of the 1970s, that capitalist crisis, employers everywhere they walked out on this idea of a comprehensive welfare state that would balance between the interests of capitalists and workers. And I mean, since then, we've seen especially like social democratic parties in Finland and elsewhere, but also center-right, kind of slowly chipping away at these gains from gains of workers, because you know, really that's what neoliberalism is anyway. It's like capitalism without significant resistance from workers, and you know, this latest round of quite extreme austerity in the government program is going to hit quite hard potentially if they manage to get all the legislation through, because the parliament's just about to open. So, but you know, it can be quite extreme, and the cuts to unemployment benefit and social assistance, which is like a last resort benefit for people who really need income to get by. Like, cuts to these kind of things are going to really hurt, including people who voted for the Finns party. And I mean, it's one of these great ironies that these far-right, quote-unquote, populist parties claim to represent the interests of an excluded working class. I mean, just like Trump did as well in the United States. But then they actually end up screwing them over, and you know, they're not really offering any kind of real challenge to the power of employers and the establishment like they claim.
How does what's happening in Finland, and I'm not sure if you can speak on this, it's fine if not, connect to the rightward shift in Sweden as well. There's a border that's shared, obviously, something like 5%, if I'm not mistaken, of Finns are Swedish speakers natively. I might be off on that percentage. You can correct me, Kyle. But like, what is the connection there? Are those movements in any way analogous?
I mean, I don't know exactly about the networks which link, say, the far right in Sweden and Finland. I mean, what I maybe could tentatively say is that Sweden has historically, as part of its immigration policy, taken in more migrants than Finland. For example, it has a large Kurdish community in Sweden. For example, that was a factor in the negotiations around Finland and Sweden joining NATO, because Erdogan, Turkey's authoritarian lead, problem with Sweden taking Kurdish migrants who had been standing up against Turkey's historic oppression of Kurds in the Middle East. But I don't know exactly, Emma.
Sure, that was completely out of left field, so don't even worry about it. But that I guess is where I'd love to take our conversation before we wrap about Finland's entry into NATO and how that connects really with the politics of the far right rising, and if there is a connection, how bipartisan the desire is within Finland to join NATO, and what that means, I guess, about neoliberalism and austerity within Finland.
Well, I mean, just taking like NATO. I mean, it's part of a whole complex of institutions that have actually come to play a large role in neoliberalism writ large, because it's not just about economics, like weaponry and wars also back up capitalist interests, and NATO's played quite a vicious role in supporting American power, especially, and American wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in other places like this. Where it gets complicated is that Finland obviously has a very, very long border and a very long history with Russia. So when Putin invaded Ukraine, people in Finland, they identified very directly with Ukrainian suffering, and there were all these kind of analogies to like Finland's conflicts with Russia in the Second World War, especially the so-called Winter War. So I mean, I think what we've seen, at least from my perspective, is that we've seen that pro-Ukrainian sentiment really channeled somewhere where it needn't have gone, actually, which is into pro-NATO sentiment. Like, the problem is really seen not as one of militarism and violence more generally, and of military alliances making the world a less safe place. The problem is seen as one of Russian imperialism, and NATO is the answer to make Finland more safe, and that's been the majority perspective in Finland, basically amongst all the main political parties. And
you can understand it, though, right? I mean, I guess it is an easy sell in terms of just like the history of past Russian invasions of Finland. It like domestically, I would imagine that's not going to meet much resistance.
Yeah, and Ukraine needed to wage a war of self-defense against Russia, who invaded it. So that had to be done. But where it gets complicated, of course, is that you're kind of inviting in American power and American imperialism to try and balance against Russia. And here's where it gets complicated, because the American interest, even though they keep saying it's to help Ukraine win a quick war against Russia. I mean, it's not quite like that. I mean, sometimes I call it kind of like a Goldilocks war in some ways. And what I mean by that is that the Americans, they want to intervene to prop up Ukraine just enough so that the Ukrainians don't sign what the Americans would regard, especially as a capitulationist settlement along the lines of Minsk. Or Minsk 2, right? So they want to prop them up enough to avoid that, but not so much as to inadvertently end up dragging the United States, especially because when we're talking about NATO, we're really talking about the Americans, because they account for 70% of all defense spending, war spending across all NATO members. So I mean, the Americans don't want to prop up Ukraine so much that they would get dragged into a direct war with Russia either.
Right. Well, I mean, that is the I would say the balance being struck here. We had an interview on Monday about this as well, which was met, like, I think with some mixed reactions from people about NATO in general and about the United States' involvement in Ukraine. I support funding the Ukrainian defense, but you can still have two tracks of thought at the same time, which is that NATO, though, is clearly an extension of U.S. interests within Europe, and then for Sweden and Finland to join into the alliance within like a year and a half of the invasion, that is clearly, I would say, a win for U.S. capitalist interests and international kind of empire interests within the context of Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And unfortunately, it's always the same with militarism on wars. I mean, you have hawks on our side, and then you have hawks on the other sides, in this case on the Russian side, and it's another one of these double acts, because they feed off and encourage one another. And I mean, what gets lost and crowded out in all this is the possibility of ceasefires, negotiations, and even a fragile peace. Because while it's true that Ukraine needed to defend itself against Russia, at least enough to be able to negotiate from a position of strength. I mean, what it doesn't need is to wage an ongoing war against Russia that's going to be frozen and potentially last for years. And I mean, if nothing's done, potentially even like a lost decade or something like this. And this is something that NATO does impose a constraint in terms of, because they're not really interested in negotiations. What they're interested in is, one, weakening Russia, which is something completely different from helping Ukraine, potentially at least. They want to overcome contradictions within NATO, especially that France and Germany would play a more independent role vis-a-vis the United States in NATO. And I think in some ways they were also looking towards the bigger picture, not just in Europe, but also in the Pacific, because America's looking at China, and it's very interested in containing China, and in some ways bogging down Russia in a long war with Ukraine. Kind of you can kind of see how that kind of contributes to making space for America to continue this strained but nevertheless real pivot to Asia, which started under Obama.
Yeah, I mean, well, that is a consequence. But fascinating stuff, Kyle Bailey, and also dark stuff, particularly about domestically what's happening in Finland. I really appreciate you catching our audience up with that. Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Politics at York University in Toronto. Kyle, where can people find your stuff if they'd like to read more of what you have to say?
Well, I have a recent article in this year's Socialist Register, which is published by Merlin Press in London, by Monthly Review in New York, and by Fernwood Press in Toronto. So in the Socialist Register 2023.
All right. Well, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much, Kyle.
All right. Thank you, Emma.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye. All right, guys. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up the first hour of this program. But first, we have to tell you, this is the first day of the Just Coffee 25% off sale. You can get the Majority Report blend. You can get any coffee, right, Bradley? Any coffee with the code MR25.
Even the Marin stuff?
Well, I mean,
there was a carve out.
Steer clear of that crap.
Wow.
Just kidding. Just kidding. It's all good. It's all good. MR25. MR25. My brain is not good anymore. That is the code JustCoffee 25% off with the code MR25. JustCoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, and chocolate. Code MR25 for 25% off of their coffee. Matt, what is happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, like I said, Griscom's going to be doing a bit of a memorial, a Michael Brooks memorial Griscom stream today. For patrons at patreon.com/Left Reckoning, we're going to be finishing up our reading of Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon about the 1848 revolution and why it didn't really do the full thing and ended up with a sort of restoration of the monarchy under Napoleon's nephew. So check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Not excited about that Ridley Scott Napoleon movie, gotta say. I have low expectations.
I see, like, I'm very... I don't know about, like, Ridley Scott. I don't even know... I barely know about Christopher Nolan, just enough to be skeptical of the Oppenheimer thing. But, like, generally, I like period pieces, but I'm also like skeptical of like, okay, this is going to be neutered, and even like, what was the Black Messiah movie, the Fred Hampton movie?
Yeah.
Judas and the Black Messiah.
Like, I think like all these are really good, and then it's like, you sort of read the people who are like closer to the actual history of it, and it's like, okay, well, I guess it's better than another Marvel Universe movie.
Well, like, for example, people might be objecting to like the fact that the Lakeith Stanfield character is portrayed semi-sympathetically when he was, working with the FBI.
Right.
But still, overall, I think pretty good compared to. And it has Dominique Fishback in it, who is like one of the best actresses around right now. I tried to watch that movie or that show, Swarm. It's too nasty.
But with regards to like Napoleon, like, I mean, I like Hollywood putting large budgets towards period pieces. So
Totally.
like, whether the politics are agreeable or not, I think that would be something to look forward to.
I'm seeing Oppenheimer on Saturday with family, and
American Prometheus, actually, the first month.
That's what it's based on, right?
Yeah, by I forget what the guy's name is. But I listened to that audiobook the first month.
Kai Bird and Marty Sherwin, who we've actually had on the show, I believe.
Wait, that's the author?
Yeah, it seems, right? American Prometheus, is this the book we're talking about?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know there's two authors. But anyway, that's a really good book, but I listened to it on audiobook the first month I worked at Majority Report.
Oh, well, we'll see. And then I'm seeing Barbie on Monday. I'm doing it. I'm supporting this good weekend in cinema.
Attack on Men, sure.
Yeah. Well, excuse me. Yeah, right. Well, I'm a part of the communist propaganda or the Chinese
trying to
government.
emasculate people and stuff like that. That's what Barbie does. It's actually feminist.
What's interesting though is I'm kind of excited just because I think it's going to just be a total like chaotic movie, Napoleon, because like The Last Duel was also kind of chaotic with Ridley Scott. But it's interesting that they chose Joaquin Phoenix because like Joaquin Phoenix, I think like historically is like 25 years older than when Napoleon was like coming up and like, and, like the time
they're doing
period.
that with Killers of the Flower Moon
it's like
too.
right.
I mean,
It's like it's just kind of weird that obviously they're using a more marketable actor, but like he's not like Joaquin's like 50 and Napoleon's
film
like
has always been so bad at that. Like and especially like showing war, it's like fucking old fogies like John Wayne. Like no, it is kids.
Yeah. I mean that's the Game of Thrones books were good at that. Like in terms of, I mean, it's fantasy, but it's depicting, Sansa's supposed to be like 11 getting married. Anyway,
Bran is like 8.
Yeah, but I am excited for Oppenheimer and Barbie. I'm seeing them both, and we'll report back. Hey guys, same. I will just say on ESPN, we spoke about the running back debacle at the tag deadline, what that means for like their labor politics essentially. We also talked about the passing of the torch at Wimbledon and DeAndre Hopkins getting signed, all kinds of fun stuff. YouTube.com/ESPN show. What is up, my friends Matt Binder and Brandon?
Hello. Nothing much.
Hello. What's happening on the discourse, Brandon?
We should have a new episode for you out this weekend, as I always say. I'm an aspirational person. I hate to, I'm sure on the outside it looks like I say that a lot and that I don't deliver, and that's just the truth. But what you don't see is behind the scenes how hard I try to deliver. But that's okay.
That's okay.
And what your intent is.
It's a part of your charm. Matt Binder, on the other side of things, what's happening with your highly productive multiple shows that you're working on? Feel bad, Brandon.
Yeah, sure.
Feel
so
bad.
This week for Doomed, I used the opportunity that I had to actually do like a multi-stream with the Letter Hack, where we talked about, current events, politics, news, me, a lot of talk about me. We also, talked about Michael Brooks's book Against the Web a bit. So everyone should definitely go check that out at youtube.com/Matt Binder. A new episode of Scam Economy has been recorded. It will be released early next week. What you have to look forward to is a conversation with Paris Marks of the Great Tech Won't Save Us podcast, where we dive into, we focus on, I should say, the one of the many tech hype bubbles, and that is VR. And of course, we get a little bit into the metaverse and cryptocurrencies, fingers in that as well. So be on the lookout for that. It'll be up at youtube.com/Matt Binder and at scameconomy.com. And I'm on the Majority Report right now. And then later tonight, Leftist Mafia.
Boom. All right. Well, the number is 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs that look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what?
What?
Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em, fuck 'em.
Things I do for the bigger game plan.
By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on.
Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. It is the fun half, everybody. Lots of fun. We'll do some clips in a sec. We'll read some IMs for a second. Mike from Bavaria saw Barbie yesterday. It's great. Conservatives are going to complain so much. Yeah, that's what I've heard. We'll get to some of the pre-complaints as well. In South Carolina Socialist, Emma, I'm at the Starbucks next to a New York Giant scout right now. Do you want me to tell him anything? I mean, what should I tell him? What do you want me to tell him? Giant Scout. I would just say that the Giants should not continue to neglect the interior of the offensive line in later rounds of the draft. I would love some more developmental prospects.
More Jihad Ward.
Yeah, well, I mean, they also they neglected the linebacker core for a really long time, but that's seemingly devalued. I don't know. Don't say any of that because it's too half-baked, and maybe I want a job there in the future. It's a joke. Bernie bought three. I feel like I thought about, if I ever wanted to make some sort of like career transition, but all of my, like tweets about like fuck you Ben Shapiro or something might come back to haunt me in any other professional context. So I'm in this for the long haul, unfortunately. Logan Soy. Absolutely loving the Leftist Mafia podcast. One of its greatest strengths is the diversity of the mafia itself. However, if someone was holding a gun to my head and said, if you don't come up with a criticism of leftist mafia right now, I will unwoke you, then I guess it would be there's a major lacking of representation of a Caucasian female aged 25 to 30-year-old demographic. If only there was some sort of guest you could bring in to plug that gap. Left is best.
Is this a self IM, Emma?
I did not IM this. Just someone who's very smart and good.
I appreciate the advocacy for me joining Leftist Mafia, caller. But unfortunately, I am no longer within the 25 to 30 demographic. I'm just a little bit out of that.
But, easy mistake, right?
Otherwise, dead on.
Rich King says, I was in Helsinki back in November for a film festival and loved it. Yeah, it's great. The people were so nice, great, dry, sardonic sense of humor, saw a cool meme rock band, and drank plenty of Finnish long drink. When I asked a young person about the Sanna Marin controversy, they said basically older folks pushed it, seemingly nothing different than boomers complaining about millennials and avocado toast while shaking their fists at the sky. You hate to see them go down this road, and I hope that they can pull themselves out of it. Also watched a crazy Finnish version of Macbeth in 1987. Check it out if you can find it. I will. Charlie said, hey y'all, newly trans person here. I appreciate the coverage you do about us. You all are true allies and continue to be a big comfort in me during my transition. Left is best. That is very kind. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Congrats. Sam's Hanging Chad. Hey, did you ever cover the MTG MAGA rap video? I know it's not actual news, but I thought it would be a good olive branch to Tim Pool by showing music that might actually be worse than his.
I wasn't aware of
I was
MTG
not
rap
aware.
video.
We'll check it out.
Is it Marjorie Taylor Greene rapping, or is it just like a rap video about her?
I think a rap video.
I think it's that same guy with the wild face. Yeah, it's like Forgiato Blow and his friend.
He gets around.
He's all they got. Like he is the conservative rap guy. There is nobody else.
Yeah. I'm not that interested in that guy anymore.
Number 13, hopefully these policies issues are a generational issue. People that grew up and then became established under neoliberalism and bipartisan institutionalism are perhaps too indoctrinated and monetarily successful to believe in a different structure. Younger politicians who grew up under the failures of the current structure are more inclined to criticize and change it. I agree. Chicago letter carrier, if Biden were pro-labor, he would get off his ass and rectify things with the USPS board instead of appointing new members that were part of the Trump administration. Right. Yes.
Yeah, like start acting like it. Like it's like, I mean, This reminds me of when I was in college and I was looking for a major, and I briefly considered rhetoric, and it was like, I'll study the rhetoric of all these great people like Winston Churchill and FDR or whatever, and you realize it's like that's lies.
Yeah,
like
right.
it's set for a purpose.
Yes.
Like it's only instructive to the extent you know the actual like real workings of the government that is meant to like sort of allow, and then you can start to pull stuff from it. So like until we get blood sacrifices, like Jerome Powell is kicked out, or Larry Summers is just like catapulted into the sun or something like that.
Yeah.
Like this is all pretty meaningless. And like, look, the interest rate stuff, like there is good to the fact that like cheap money isn't the problem necessarily. It's that the only people who have access to cheap money is like banks and venture capitalists and stuff like that. Like we should have been using this cheap banking period of the last 10 years to actually get stuff done, like infrastructure and that sort of thing. And like that we're getting around to that at the time that we're also raising rates. It's just like we're not being smart about this. So like it's hard for me to be too optimistic about the Biden economy. Like I heard from a lot of people, like, yeah, I'm earning more than I've really ever earned in my adult life. And I'm also paying more to my landlord than I've ever paid in my adult life. Really, like, even thought to. I thought I would.
Meat and Potato says, congratulations once again to Emma for putting Tim Pool in the hospital. Now is the time for Emma to take that momentum to another victory over the far right. Meghan Murphy is an established political commentator who has publicly challenged Emma to a debate a few times. I'm sure the MR staff is familiar with Meghan Murphy as a so-called gender-critical feminist and is popular among transphobes like Joe Rogan, who are too cowardly to identify as far-right extremists. I'm confident that Emma would totally destroy Meghan Murphy in a debate on feminism and trans rights. The queer community needs smart, progressive, cishet women like Emma to publicly embarrass these fascist turfs. So how about it? Left is best. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I just think sometimes, like, a trans woman is a little bit more of a better person to be speaking on these issues than myself. And I don't want to be perceived as monetizing this for my own gain when it's not my community. But I don't even know. I think she's tweeted at me. Maybe I just missed her debate challenges. I don't know, but whatever, maybe.
I've never heard of her.
Okay, good. So I wasn't the only one, because you said I was like, okay, I guess out the game.
Yeah, she looks like a professional attention seeker.
To be honest, it's hard for me to like differentiate between all these blue check turfs coming at me.
Yeah,
they all are white women and they all look the same. So.
There are a lot of far right television shows now. Like they've really ballooned in the past like 5 years. All that PPP loan money. That's where it went.
Yeah. She does like misgendering as like a sort of
how edgy
attention seeking thing. Yeah, no, I mean. The thing with these people is like there's a balance to be set, because some of these morons are just like, you know, looking for attention, and like I don't think we should provide it. Tim Pool has got the attention. He's like literally having like Republican members of Congress onto his show to talk about like all sorts of things. And so like we're a little bit resistant to jump on these flavor of the month people all the time, because like we kind of have to wait till they get to a critical mass. Like even with Jordan Peterson, people are asking us to do Jordan Peterson. It's like, why would this freak doctor? Often Canadians.
Right. We don't want to elevate them. We want to challenge them once they're at a point where they're actually influencing.
Yeah,
actually a problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great policy, because you know if you're on Twitter enough, you realize that there's a lot of entitlement amongst far right people to like just come into your mentions and demand that you explain everything to them, as though like the world will stop if they aren't convinced of like the efficacy of vaccines. And you just want to be like, bug off, like bug off, dudes. Like it clearly comes from like the top, where like they just feel so entitled to everyone's time. But it's like no, like it's such a self-important thing to just be like, no. You need to dedicate your time to convincing me personally, because my opinion is the most important. It's like you could talk. You're just one person, dude. You could talk to anybody. Someone who isn't already brain poisoned.
They just want to monetize it too. Yeah. So it's just let's should we do Jesse Waters with Ted Cruz?
We should probably do Sam on the ticket line first.
Yeah. So Sam is right now, or I guess earlier this morning, he was on the picket line near the Netflix offices supporting the actors. Sam is a SAG-AFTRA member. You know, he's a member of the union. I think like that covers him when he does Bob's Burgers and things like that, and when he'd acted in the past. So he sent us this video. Oh God.
He's one of those big rich actors you see the anti-union people talking about, fighting for their higher wages. Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen Next Stop
He's up there with Tom Cruise and.
Here he is. Here he is taking a selfie video. I just love this freeze frame here. Here we go.
It's about, I would say, close to 400 people picketing in one of 4 places in Manhattan today. I'm out in front of Netflix, and pretty big. I'll talk more about it tomorrow.
Okay.
That's
Thanks,
great.
Sam.
Can he give me Fran Drescher's autograph?
Yeah. I'll ask him. He surprisingly knows just like a bunch of random famous people.
Well, that's not that surprising.
No, I guess that's not
friends
right.
with them, but he says
pretty
there's
cool of Sam.
lots of MR fans on the lines.
Whoa. Wow. All right. Well, that was Sam walking the walk, and there he is.
There you go.
There you go. I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, because he's none of us here are the big famous actors on network television.
No.
So, we'll have to leave it up to Sam to let us know everything tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow to the Majority Report, everyone.
Tune in. Yeah, I do want to hear about it, though, how it went.
Right.
All right, so...
And I'm making jokes, but obviously I've seen like the stats out there, and it's something like 86 or something % of people who are part of SAG don't even make enough money, which is like $26,000, I believe, or something around that amount to qualify for like the healthcare program. So when you see people out there talking about this and framing it like, oh, why is these rich multimillionaire actors asking for more money? Well, if they're out there, then that's good because it brings more awareness and it shows that there's true solidarity.
Totally.
But second, the main issues aren't how much those guys are making, and they're not even out there, protesting for higher wages, because honestly, if Tom Cruise wanted more money, he hasn't got to hit the streets. He'll have a business meeting with a studio head. You know what I mean? Like, give me a break.
The only person's money that we should ever be counting in this situation is ownership, because they don't actually earn it. Like the idea that we're like, and this, you see this in sports all the time too. They have earned this amount of money. Yeah, the owners earn that. Like, or owners take 49% of all of that. So like they should be taking more. And that's ideological that we're starting. Oh, they have enough. Why are they striking? Anytime that labor stands up against capital for more of what it's producing, that's good, and you should support it. You don't need to get into math.
And I saw, I actually tweeted this out, Bethany Frankel of Real Housewives of New York, in the past, speaking about how reality stars should be organizing for their residuals as well, because even these low-level reality shows, like those shows like Jersey Shore or The Hills or Real Housewives get replayed over and over on streaming, and they don't see basically any residuals from that as well, because reality TV came out of the writer's strike, and the biggest boom was when they were trying to find alternative programming in 2007, 2008, and that's when reality TV took off, and those contracts were just replications of the very exploitative ones that we're seeing being protested against today. And like, for the big stars like her that come out of reality TV, they can monetize it and build up a brand of, alcohol like she did and then make millions. But there are plenty of like people on The Bachelor or other things like that who don't. No, I don't want to watch it. It's a little too indulgent in things I care about.
That's actually a great point. I think that's why it's important that Sam is out there, not only as a king of cinema, but as a king of YouTube, because that dichotomy between like scripted work, like scripted movies and television, and unscripted work like YouTube influencing, like I guess prank videos, although that's a lot of scripted too, is I think what I've seen a lot of people on Twitter who are anti this protest or who are ambivalent about this strike, sort of referencing as why they don't deserve more money. Because like, well, there's just more competition now when it comes to like watching Twitch and watching, YouTube videos, as though a good portion of Twitch and YouTube are people reacting to scripted television and movie content in some form or another, or like video games. And, I think there just needs to be a greater understanding of content creation as a form of labor, because they're not just coming like, these predatory capitalists aren't just coming for like scripted content. Twitch is changing the revenue cut that people are getting. This is a problem across all media, that there are a bunch of people trying to extract the wealth from creators.
Yep. Let's do, I guess, this insane Ted Cruz clip. Okay.
Yeah.
So
gotta be more specific.
Yeah, I know. Jesse Waters had Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, on his program. Jesse Waters has taken over for Tucker Carlson, and they're talking about the real issues in America, which is, films, right?
And not the way that they compensate their writers and actors. It's that they are trying to social engineer men out of existence.
Apparently, I thought Barbie was going to be a fun time for me and my friends to like have a little wine before and then see maybe Ryan Gosling with his shirt off, some fun colors and outfits. But no, that's not what it is, apparently. It's also a Chinese communist plot, according to Senator Ted Cruz, one of the most visible senators, most powerful people in this country, came in second in the Republican primary. And this is how he thinks.
Senator Ted Cruz is mad at the Barbie movie. His beef with Barbie centers around a map. If you see right here,
beef with Barbie.
Next to Asia, shows the 9 dashes. Now, those dashes signify Chinese ownership of the ocean, islands, and reefs. The Chinese believe they own the South China Sea, but they don't.
Can you pause it for a sec? Keep that up there. Keep that up there. Keep that map up there. Okay. So I have seen the trailer enough and have gotten excited enough for the movie that I can tell you what's going on here. This is, I believe, one of the Barbies, like, own maps of the world, right? It's not meant to be some sort of secret, like, QAnon message.
Look at the
to
cartography
the world.
here.
No, this is how Americans see the rest of the globe.
Right. It's meant to be like a childlike depiction of a map in a movie about a toy. There are dashes all over the place. There are waves. There are hurricanes. This is not a depiction. This is not the desire from the executives to make sure that hurricanes happen.
I don't know. I look at this and I think, I support China invading Taiwan right now. I don't know how you can get any other meaning from that map.
Wait, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 dashes. Didn't he say there's 9?
Yeah, he's right. And the 9 apparently, does go to some sort of the 9-dash line at various times referred to as an 11-dash line, not by the Republic of China, is a set of line segments in various maps that indicate the territory. So yeah, it's not 8 dashes.
There's 8 on the map. They don't even have the number right.
I just don't think propaganda works very well if it's this coded. Like, obviously, I don't think the average person is going to look at this map and understand what he's trying to explain. Like, if you have to explain it this much, most people are just going to think it's like the little dashes on a map, like a pirate treasure map.
Right. Yeah. Subliminal advertising, like, it doesn't really work that well. The extent that we think it can change behavior that much, you actually need a real message that people consciously interpret and decode to really change.
But I mean, there must be something very secretive about it actually being 8 dashes as opposed to 9. Let's see if they get into that. Let's go back 10 seconds in this complete insanity.
Senator Ted Cruz is mad at the Barbie movie. His beef with Barbie centers around a map. If you see right here, next to Asia, shows the 9 dashes. Now, those dashes signify Chinese ownership of the ocean, islands, and reefs. The Chinese believe they own the South China Sea, but they don't. So why did the Barbie movie bow to China? It's a business decision. Warner Brothers bows down to China more than Janet Yellen. Senator Ted Cruz joins me now. So, Senator, did you even see the movie, or did you just see this stupid map?
came out
Yeah,
yesterday.
no, I have not seen the movie. I've just seen the stupid map, and I got to say, look, I mean, as you just showed, the map is drawn like in crayons. It's roughly a map of the world, but China, Asia,
There's no
is just
Europe.
a big crayon box. But then, right to the east of where China is, are the 9 dashes, and to anyone who's not really focused on geopolitics, those lines don't mean anything. But what those lines indicate is the Communist Party of China puts out official maps with those 9 dashes, and they are asserting sovereignty over the entire South China Sea. They're saying all of that is China's. And by the way, all of their neighbors disagree. Vietnam disagrees. The Philippines disagrees. Actually, the country of Vietnam has banned the movie Barbie
How do they feel about
from
us?
their nation because these 9 dashes are replicated.
So they can't see Margot Robbie. That is a huge mistake. Does Warner Brothers have
Shut
to
up.
push this propaganda so
Creep.
that they allow the movie to be showcased in China?
Yeah, what he's getting at, kind of without realizing it, is that actually what we're doing right now, you and I, Senator Ted Cruz, is marketing this movie and telling people about it to the extent that's probably going to raise sales. Like they might rely on this sort of stuff. I don't know. I often think a lot of the culture war stuff I think that the studios kind of do subconsciously play into it. I don't think, because if we looked on that map, there's also dashed lines in the Caribbean. I don't think they're saying like this is the Monroe Doctrine.
Or there's no continent of Europe. Did you see the continent of Europe on that map? Because I don't. And do you know what that means? They want to erase the Aryan race.
Right.
Obviously. Obviously.
I didn't see it. I did see how the American flag only had like 7 stripes on it.
Wow. Do you know those are probably for the blue states?
I assumed it was some sort of reference to Islam.
Stars are for the states. Dumbass. But see, I don't even know.
Who knows?
This.
Who cares?
Yeah, who knows and who cares?
I also
Let's
didn't
go.
count the stripes, so I was
Yeah,
making that up.
let's keep going.
Margot Robbie, that is a huge mistake. Does Warner Brothers have to push this propaganda so that they allow the movie to be showcased in China, which is what, like 1.8 billion potential customers?
Yeah, look, that's exactly what's going on here. Obviously, the little girls that are going to see Barbie, none of them are going to have any idea what those dashes mean. This is really designed for the eyes of the Chinese censors, and they're trying to kiss up to the Chinese Communist Party because they want to make money selling the movie in China. And sadly, Jesse, this is a pattern we've seen of lots of Hollywood movie studios allowing China to censor American movies. And I got to tell you, I introduced legislation. It's called the Script Act, that says the federal government will not allow movie makers to use U.S. government assets, things like jets or tanks or ships or helicopters.
Good.
If they allow the Chinese government to censor their films. And my legislation in substantial parts passed in December of last year. Just a few weeks ago, the Pentagon put out the official guidance saying, if you let China censor your movies, you're not getting U.S. assets. Sadly, the Barbie movie, they didn't have any F-35.
We should not be allowing U.S. assets to be used in making of Hollywood films to begin with. Like the Pentagon's like that we have had like official U.S. military involvement with regards to films about what we've been doing in the Middle East is appalling, and it should be historically damned. It shouldn't be like tinkered at. Just we can only do it in case we're like aggressive against China in the content.
And this is not censorship. This is actually not. It's an addition, even in their insane interpretation. It's an addition of like a nationalist Chinese thought about the sovereignty over the South China Sea, but it doesn't have the 9 dashes. It just has the 8 because that makes it a little more subtle.
Gotta hide it,
apparently,
yeah.
you gotta hide it.
I mean, he is drawing, at least touching on a trend in movies that you can notice over the past few decades, and that not necessarily censorship per se, but there's been a lot more Chinese investment in certain large blockbuster movies. That's why like in like not Terminator, but like Transformers like 4, they just somehow end up in China. That's why at the end of the Meg, they end up in China.
Yeah.
This is just like a funding decision that some movie studios are going with. The fact
It's
that
capitalism. That's a massive market. So that is part of why some of these movies are being like directed towards China or giving lip service or whatever. They want the international box office is incredibly important for those big blockbusters, which are like Marvel movies and freaking Transformers or whatever.
They just matter a lot more now, and that's just what they're gripping. They're griping about that. Like, movies have to be made with an international audience in mind, and some of that stuff is bad. Some of the stuff that some countries do not want in their movies can be anti-gay, it can be anti-trans, it can be sort of anti certain ethnic minorities. So are some of the decisions that we make in our movie industry.
But all of that would be said that it's wokeness by Disney trying to indoctrinate your children. Like, what Ted Cruz is in favor of in terms of censorship domestically is the censorship of, say, a lesbian couple kissing in Buzz Lightyear. Apparently that's woke indoctrination. But in fact, Ted Cruz is very much aligned with, say, Saudi Arabia or other governments that won't show those kinds of movies because they include that content. So the person who's pro-censorship on behalf of these movie studios is definitely Ted Cruz. Well, that was dumb as hell. Let's take a call. Calling from a 707 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
I don't even know what to say to it. Like, Ted Cruz is so not even relevant anymore. I'm sorry to the caller for
Hold on. One second. I
was just saying, like, this. It's so clear. Like, this is just like Ted Cruz, like, grasping for any sort of relevancy. When's the last time anyone has talked about him? He's like just a nobody in his own party, in their own media world. Nobody in right-wing media even talks about Ted Cruz anymore. He doesn't appeal to the very small, serious Republican base. He doesn't appeal to the much larger MAGA Republican base. Even further right guys don't like him. Like, he's just flailing in that party, and so he needs to do things and say things that try to give him some relevancy at this point, because he's even in a worse space now than when Donald Trump was just on a regular basis attacking him and his wife, because at least then people were talking about Ted Cruz.
Totally. Micah, sorry, calling from a 707 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You already told me, but Micah, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm calling in from Sacramento.
Gotcha.
Speaking of Ted Cruz, there's actually kind of ties into my question comment. There's a pretty big primary going down there for the Democratic side between Allred and Gutierrez. Gutierrez is
Colin
the more
Allred?
progressive choice. Yeah, Allred's running as well as Gutierrez. I'm forgetting his last name at the moment.
It's so
Roland Gutierrez.
And is Gutierrez going at him from the left?
He doesn't have any direct policies on his website, but he seems just in his language to be more progressive.
Okay.
And I know you actually interviewed him back when he was running for Congress originally, when he was still at TYT.
He ran as much more progressive than he is now. Yeah.
Exactly, because he actually used to be in the Justice Democrats, and then dropped out of their endorsement and started taking PAC money.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I actually wanted to talk about Justice Democrats. They actually just laid off half of their staff because they're severely underfunded, and then even before that, we saw another progressive PAC. Brand new Congress completely shut down as well. So I just wanted to talk about the state of the left, electorally. We're seeing all these kind of edgy online people are saying oh no, we just don't vote, don't donate to politicians, and just do a revolution, and without actually doing anything substantial, and just raising money for their podcast, Sawant and up in Washington, right? She just left her city council seat to start a podcast and is shitting on AOC for endorsing Biden. It's you think she's going to endorse the guy that says Wi-Fi causes cancer? What do you want her to do here?
Well, I don't agree with that stance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's silly too. I think I would like to see progressives, in particular DSA people, hold their endorsements certain unions are, and I would like to see more and more of that and actually make them work for it. Ultimately, like, yeah, if it's Biden versus Trump, it's not a question. And I think people trying to make it one is a little bit silly. But look, like, I don't think we should focus too much on those people because they haven't done shit still. It's still the exact same thing. And I literally saw someone say, like, oh, like, what was the problem with the Green Party in 2020? Why haven't they still done shit? It's because Howie Hawkins Russiagated, apparently. Like, so that's the amount of introspection that's going on.
That's so unserious.
There.
But to your point about the fact that they're laying off people and shuttering, that is concerning.
Sad, yeah.
I mean, this is the fallout from and I think you're seeing it reflected in progressive media, like the fallout from the Bernie campaign not being, electorally successful for him, and like genuinely the Biden presidency being like such a dead end for left of center progress, I guess, in terms of how people feel about it. I think Biden's been better than his past rhetoric would have indicated on that front, but like, it is the state of the left within electoral politics is certainly at a standstill still, and I'm not shocked to hear about that lack of funding. But I mean the point though is, I think to Matt mentioning DSA, that is one shining light, I would say, in the wake of the Bernie campaign, because in New York and in other areas, they've been successful, and I think we should support them.
And it's got to be look. It's not like it's perfect. Like Khazar is someone who I supported and still support, but like the Israel Palestine stuff is
very
just
pro-Israel.
Is just disgusting.
Yeah.
And like, so like this strategy isn't perfect. Like, then there's things I criticize about AOC, but like the fact is that those folks who are constantly criticizing don't have anything to point to the positive. And I don't mean that in like a moral way. I mean like literally a thing that they've done. It's like it's complain for the party that they say is worthless to even appeal to do something that it doesn't want to do. That's they until they actually do something, I think we shouldn't be super concerned with like reacting to their criticisms. Once they start doing something, if it's good things, then we support it. If it's like silly, then we don't. But I don't think we should be so anxious about the type of things that are coming out of from people who are like averse to doing anything at all.
Appreciate the call,
yeah,
Micah.
That's fair. Thank you.
Thanks. Here we go. Calling from a 480 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
This is you.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Hey, very long time, but first time caller.
Do you mind talking into your phone a little more? It's hard to hear you.
Oh, yeah. Give me one second. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, cool. Sorry. Yeah, hey, so kind of random, but I just wanted...
Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sorry, my name's Trent. I'm calling from Phoenix.
Trent from Phoenix.
Yeah.
Hope you're staying hydrated.
Extremely hydrated. Drinking water.
Okay, you're back on your speaker or something. You're back.
Yeah, there's something wrong again, caller.
Are you on your Bluetooth headphones?
I am an audio...
Caller,
you can't even hear me.
Yeah, sorry.
Caller?
And, so I know...
Okay. Yeah, they clearly, like, they're back on Bluetooth speaker and not... You call back in 480. I'm sorry. It's just that was... That's the issue with the Bluetooth headphones. Should we do this?
That's 5G.
Yeah. Let's do this Ben Shapiro thing. Ben Shapiro has basically one excuse for Trump. You'll see it all the time when he covers him, because he clearly would prefer a different kind of conservative to be appealing to his audience, but it's just not happening. Different kind of Republican. So the only thing that he can do as the facts and logic guy on the right is to say that Trump essentially doesn't know what he's doing. Whenever Trump does something bad, he has no agency and is some sort of babe in the woods. That's generally like the tone of Shapiro's critique of Trump whenever something inexplicable happens, essentially, because he can't square his "I'm the intellectual guy" with denying on its face just actual events that have happened. This is his latest flavor of that, speaking about Trump and the nature of intent as it relates to the criminal charges that are being levied against him.
Now, Andy McCarthy has an excellent rundown on those potential charges in National Review. And here's what he says. He says, quote, "I do not believe the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States can survive this admonition unless the government can prove a defendant was trying to bilk the government out of money or tangible assets." Is there any evidence that Trump was trying to bilk the country
It's not somehow,
out of
dude.
money or tangible assets? I don't see how. So that particular section shouldn't apply.
Can you
Sorry,
pause it?
corruptly obstructing Congress.
So the context here is that this is the...
He says, I don't think...
That this is the potential January 6 charges that just came out in the news about the Jack Smith special counsel investigation. And based on the Trump charges, based on Trump's letter in response, the press has been able to glean 3 separate charges, including the one that I headlined, which was about the Reconstruction Civil Rights era suit. So that's the context of this.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Bradley.
I don't see how. So that particular section shouldn't apply. As far as
Sorry, I don't understand how, like, and like, I'm not as indefinite on this as I will be on the intent thing that's coming up later, but I don't understand how, like, documents that should be public in public archives aren't tangible assets.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Fraud the United States can survive this admonition unless the government can prove a defendant was trying to bilk the government out of money or tangible assets. Is there any evidence that Trump was trying to bilk the country out of money or tangible assets? I don't see how. So that particular section shouldn't apply. As far as corruptly obstructing Congress, he says, I don't think a charge of corruptly obstructing Congress can survive if the alleged corruption does not involve patently lawless behavior, such as evidence tampering or threats to use force against witnesses or Congress itself. Since Trump has not been implicated criminally in the violence of the Capitol riot, Jack Smith will almost certainly have to argue that the corruption lay in 1, Trump's awareness he lost the election, and B, John Eastman's nonsensical legal theory that Vice President Pence had the authority to discount electoral votes. He said, I'd be surprised if prosecutors can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump knew he'd lost the election. Again, this is my point yesterday, is that proving intent in a Trump case, very, very difficult, because Trump's intent changes moment to moment, and he's absolutely chimerical. So how exactly do you prove that Donald Trump, like today, do you think Donald Trump today thinks he lost the election? I don't. I think Donald Trump today thinks he won the election. Donald Trump has a unique capacity to convince himself of things, both for good and for bad.
And so the point there is that, well, first of all, the documents are not relevant to this because this is the January 6th one. I feel like it just to clarify that, just because
Andy McCarthy has an excellent rundown.
What is going on? Okay, it's fine. It's just
Ben Shapiro always talking somewhere. It can't escape his voice now. It's just everywhere.
I know. If that's the voice of God, God help us. But I mean, like his definition of intent is one that is completely bad faith from a legal standpoint. Matt and I were talking about this before the show. Intent doesn't mean that it's a months-long plot, you know, where you have a step-by-step process. Intent, say if you kill somebody, you can still be convicted of having intent to murder someone if you make a split-second decision to murder someone. And so it's a completely false legal theory about intent that he's relying into his argument on here.
Yeah, I mean,
like if I make a split-second decision to point a gun at your head, I mean, I know what's going to happen if I pull the trigger. I mean, the intent is very clear. I mean, I didn't need to plan that action out in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on grand jury duty all of April, and I heard the legal guidance for finding intent maybe every single day because it comes up in pretty much every single case. And just a note for people who think that they're actually getting some sort of nutrition from Ben Shapiro talking out of his ass on these things. He thinks you're stupid, and he wants you to go forth into the world with stupidity, because just think about this logically for a second. Do you think that Donald Trump is the first impulsive person to do crimes?
Yeah,
right. Like most people actually, like, you can maybe make some sort of like psychologically like case of like, is there actually, no, this is something that the law has dealt with before, Ben Shapiro, you'd be surprised that this is the instruction for intent. Intent does not require premeditation. In other words, intent does not require advanced planning, nor is it necessary that the intent be in a person's mind for any particular period of time. The intent can be formed and need only exist at the very moment the person engages in prohibited conduct or acts to cause the prohibited result, and not at any earlier time. So it's almost as if this sort of brainwave that Ben Shapiro's been running with the entire time, that from the Trump impeachment to this, that he is pathologically incapable of intent, it's almost like that is a non-starter legally.
Yeah.
That criminal defense lawyers have tried that before. It has been dismissed. That's not a real thing. It's not the first time it's been thought of. It's been tried and it's been dealt with to the point where they explicitly tell jurors, like, yeah, if they try that, that doesn't count.
No, this is like when you practice Twitter law too. Like his audience is used to having like material and social and like formal and informal consequences like mixed up in their heads by right-wing content creators who are like, free speech is being tampered with by you not being allowed to post online. And that's the same thing as like being jailed for being a native activist and all these other things, to the point where people believe this stuff is functioning in a way that's up and up. You see it all the time in the crypto industry. I'm sure Matt will tell you the same thing, where like people have a certain understanding of the law that seems entirely influenced by the way you argue online. And so I think for those sorts of people, it makes a lot of sense that like, well, yeah, when I did it, I intended it for it to be bad, but then I said it was a joke after, and so you can't be mad at me. But the law doesn't really like function that way. It doesn't even really function that way offline either, like in terms of interpersonal relationships. But, you know, for the right audience who have been like slowly boiling in this pot of stupid, it makes all the sense in the world. They're like, oh, of course, like Trump is like the Joker. That you can't put the Joker in jail, can you? He's a different person every day. It's like,
yeah, right. It's using his like actually his criminal pathology, basically. I mean, there's a ton of right-wingers that like to argue essentially that certain races of people or subsects are basically pathologically criminal or derelict. But for Trump, you can point to his brain chemistry and say this guy is just like pathologically a criminal. In that instance, Shapiro is using that as his defense, which is hilarious.
Trump was just asking questions.
Yeah,
and that's his defense. Trump had no idea where this was going to go, and so he can't be guilty of any sort of like premeditated plot.
Yeah,
your plan doesn't have to be good for you to be guilty of trying to do it.
Yeah, you know, and like Emma said, you take the documents out because that's not relevant in this case. Trying to retain the presidency, that's a tangible asset.
I would say so. Let's do this Candace Owens thing here. So do we have that? Yeah. Here's Candace Owens responding to this viewer who asked a question that is at least consistent with their obsession with groomers. And her explanation here is, incredibly homophobic. And this is how she attempts to square the circle of the entire right being fixated on calling LGBTQ people groomers and not reckoning at all with the rampant pedophilia in the Catholic Church.
Magdalena writes, "Hi, Candace. As always, I love this episode. Normally, I just hit the like button, but this time I decided to leave a comment as well. Even though I agree with some points made for Catholicism, I couldn't help but think about many Catholic priests that have been accused of gay pedophilia, something that never happened within the Protestant church, I believe. Any comment on this?"
All right, can you pause it for a sec?
Absolutely.
Yes, it did.
I don't believe that. I'm not going to look that up, but I don't believe it. Just instinctually.
No.
Absolutely not true.
Absolutely not true. Absolutely not.
False.
I mean, some of these conversion therapy camps or whatever institutions or schools that kids get sent to, they're often deeply connected with like pastors and other religious organizations, and those are rampant in terms of abuse of a variety of kinds.
A study by Lifeway Christian Resources reveals that 10% of Protestants under the age of 35 have left the church previously because they felt that sexual abuse and misconduct were not taken seriously by the church.
The Journal of Qualitative Criminal Justice and Criminology from this year, a paper entitled "Child Sex Abusers in Protestant Christian Churches."
Yeah, exactly. And notice that so this is clearly somebody who I think probably has a ideological tilt, or maybe a Protestant or an evangelical herself, but notice how she focuses on gay pedophilia. We'll return to that in a second in terms of Candace's answer, but let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting thing, is like they've been accused of gay pedophilia as opposed to, like, we're not supposed to care about the other kind of pedophilia.
Well, Magdalena writes, "Hi, Candace. As always, I love this episode. Normally, I just hit the like button, but this time I decided to leave a comment as well. Even though I agree with some points made for Catholicism, I couldn't help but think about many Catholic priests that have been accused of gay pedophilia, something that never happened within the Protestant church, I believe. Any comment on this? It absolutely has happened within the Protestant church, is the first comment I'm going to make. The problem is that there's so many Protestant churches that no one ever registers pedophilia as a problem because they're like, oh, it just happened in this section of Protestantism or this section, whereas the Catholic Church is so big and domineering, and obviously it's, it's the Catholic Church. The first church that people talk about it, and it's been associated with it. Not justification whatsoever. But the more important part of what you're saying is that gay pedophilia happened in the Catholic Church. So is the problem the Catholic Church, or is it the problem gay men that are in the Catholic Church that shouldn't be in the church? Because if you're a gay man, you shouldn't be a priest at all, right? And it is gay men that are abusing children. So whether you're a gay man abusing children at a school or a gay man abusing children at a Catholic church, the issue is that we have homosexual men that have invaded institutions. It's not because of, the education system. If there was a pedophilia scandal at schools, and there have been them, you don't then say, oh, education is wrong. Like when we had the Penn State issue, I can't think of the guy's name, Sandusky, I think it was. No one said, oh, the fault is the institution of education that allowed this to happen. No, you wouldn't say that. The problem is that a gay man got into a position of power and abused men, but people don't think that same way when it's the Catholic Church.
So Sandusky was married to a woman, Bradley says. That's a good point. Sexual abuse of children is about power. It's in the Catholic Church, it is both a homophobic institution and a patriarchal one. So priests are often, as they take vows of celibacy, around boys because they are altar boys and other things like that. And and boys are more likely to be ingratiated into a top-down hierarchical structure that is about patriarchal notions of power. So boys are more likely to be around priests in that way. But girls have been raped by priests too. Let's be clear. That is a big part.
You could literally just go to Google and type it in, and just in the past month, Catholic priest charged with sexual assault of 12-year-old girl. Completely different story. Priest arrested in sexual assault of 8-year-old little girl in Grand Rapids. Priest expected to be charged with rape, abduction of 12-year-old girl. A woman settles lawsuit over childhood sexual abuse by Catholic priest. Literally, This is just all in the past. Some of these in the past couple of weeks. Some of these in the past couple of months.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, no, I think she was very honest. At a certain point, she just dropped she just stopped condemning pedophiles and started condemning like gay men. And whether that's just like, her trying. No, she just stopped saying. She was just like, the problem isn't institutions that put men in position of power, that put predators in position of power over vulnerable populations, whether they be children or their employees or women or unhoused people or, undocumented people. It's actually that gay men are allowed to have jobs at all. That's the problem. She can't. It seems as though she's unwilling to condemn pedophilia altogether. Right. But I just feel like the emphasis on gay is because she's admitting ultimately what a lot of these sort of anti-LGBTQ wrapped up in anti-grooming stuff is afraid to admit, which is that like they just don't see it as a problem when men abuse women. No matter how old the women are there to be the, vehicle for men to exercise their power. So it's just not as big of a problem to them. They mention, it's always about the trans groomers. It's always about the LGBTQ groomers. And when you point out that there are plenty of straight men, whatever they want to say about it, like who are abusing their power over women, a lot of times family members, they're just mum about it. That's just not how they characterize the problem. And I think the fact that they don't characterize the problem of, rape and pedophilia the way it actually works, which is power over vulnerable people, tells you what they're really concerned about, which is that this patriarchy is not going to be maintained. And that's what they view in gay pedophilia, and they don't view that in any other type of pedophilia, apparently.
Yeah.
And if I could just speak to the sports thing really quick, she mentioned the Jerry Sandusky Penn State scandal as being a story about a coordinator for the team that was sexually abusing athletes and other people on the team as a gay man. That would be news to his wife that he's been married to since 1966. And the idea that this is not something that is a condemnation of college education and sports as a systemic problem would also be news to all of the gymnasts who were abused by Larry Nassar and all of the Ohio State wrestlers who were abused by Richard Strauss and allegedly enabled by wrestling coach Jim Jordan.
So
I actually don't think it wouldn't be like, oh, we wouldn't say it's a problem with the schools. Yeah, it's a real fucking problem with the schools.
But systems of power without recourse. Go on.
Well, and to the extent, and that's just general, but to the extent there's specific issue with churches themselves, it's that I thought this like in the 2000s, back in the Defense of Marriage Act, like there's a certain priest that thought, set off my gaydar, right? And I don't think he was abusive or anything like that, but like that we have people that are raised in environments that completely say, actually, it's a sin, you're going to hell if you follow this identity. Well, like, I mean, I always thought, like, what would I do? I guess, like, if I think I'm literally going to hell, well, I'll just become a priest and not do any sex. And
I'll be celibate, and
I'll be celibate my entire life.
And I will give myself over to this, give my whole identity over to this, so I can pray for salvation. I mean,
guess what? Doesn't work.
It doesn't, right? And it comes out in unhealthy ways because the church requires you to strip yourself of your humanity, which is, and for many people, I know there are asexual people out there,
right.
But for a majority of people, their sexuality. And then they're around kids, and then they're in positions of power. And of course, it's a structure that incentivizes that kind of domination, because like the right is incapable of perceiving rape and pedophilia and sexual assault as a method of lording over somebody or being exerting your power and will onto them. They see it, and it kind of tells on themselves as an extension of like this sexual gratification, which is just a piece of the whole story about what happens and how predators actually operate.
Also, when you introduce the church aspect when it comes to, victims of sexual abuse or other types of abuse, it's oftentimes hard to speak up for reasons that are entirely religious, which, you're asking someone to stand up to somebody who they have been taught to associate with the savior, the salvation of their immortal soul, which seems, silly to people who are outside of that community. But for people who, especially children who are still in the point of their lives where like they can very easily be indoctrinated to believe that sort of thing, uncritically, it's harder to speak up if it's a priest, I would imagine, than if it was just some random person who you don't view as responsible for you not going to hell.
Let alone, again, the hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church and the fact that these priests were, when there was a complaint against them, just kind of sent to a different location, as opposed to this being systemically dealt with. And like, again, this is right-wing ideology distilled. They are homophobic, obviously. That's the kind of surface level element of this. But when you scratch it, it's all about personal pathology as opposed to systems. Yep. And gay people, in her estimation, are inherently degenerate and more prone to being predators. That's what they believe. That's 100% what they believe. That is why you're hearing groomer over and over and over again, which is a trope as old as time about queer, gay people, trans people in the world. And they can't explicitly say that. Dave Rubin's her coworker or whatever, or is he with the Blaze? I forget every time. Okay. But that's always in the back of their mind. And so, like, that's why they'll never even when they target corporate power in their rhetoric, it's always about some individual corporation doing something they don't like, as opposed to systems of capitalism or, generally how we structure our society. They naturalize the structure of our society, which has changed. It changes every day. But they pretend that it's static, because then that enables them to be reactionary and demonize certain groups of people to elevate themselves. That is what it is. So Candace Owens is, definitionally on that side. Let's take another call here. Calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? This is you, but your phone sounds very bad. So either please take off. Hello?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Is it still bad?
It's better, but it's a little like you're a little close to your phone. So, but better if you took your headphones off.
There is no headphones. This is just kind of what it is.
Okay, it's all right. Keep going. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
My name is Garrett. I'm from California, so you got 2 Cali callers today.
Very cool. Garrett from California, what's on your mind?
So I'm from a red area of California, which is very rural, and it kind of puts us in a unique position. Have any of you guys ever been to Joshua Tree?
No, but I've, seen about it, and I think Bradley's been. Bradley, you've been to... Oh, he went not near. I've seen photos. It's in Palm Springs, right?
Yeah, pretty close. It's very touristy because we have the national park, and while the tourism is great for economic reasons, it brings a lot more money here that would normally not be here.
Mm-hmm.
It also has created a really bad real estate problem.
Mm-hmm.
For 2 reasons, I think, primarily. Number one, Airbnb.
Dude, it's really, the phone is really rough right now. I'm sorry to tell you that.
Yeah, can you top line your point?
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the suggestion?
Can you just keep it really brief and maybe...
and then we'll respond off air? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no problem. What is the best way to combat from a electoral perspective like landowners in such a rural area when that is kind of like the dominating force? Because that is what the economic asset is.
And which area are you talking about
Joshua
specifically?
Tree.
Oh, yeah.
Well, caller, you got me there. I mean, there needs to be, and maybe some states like California are going to address this, like the mass culling and purchasing of properties for rental markets like Airbnb. I appreciate the call. I'm gonna hang up there. There needs to be some sort of review process or board, I would say, at the federal level ideally, but even at the state level, where people can get approved or not get approved based on their plans for that property, because the more and more things get bought up by like these venture capital groups or whoever to rent out as vacation homes, the less affordable it's going to be for people. And I think there needs to be some limits on that. I'm not exactly sure how that would look, but that was a tough question. Appreciate the call. What should we do here? Any suggestions, guys, on the sound sheet?
Let's take a look.
In the meantime, I'll read some IMs. Phineas Erb, let's not forget the Protestant evangelical churches are fought for decades to protect the right to sexually assault children in the form of child marriage, 100%. Data, Emma, and crew, were you able to catch the episode of Some More News about groomers? I have not. I'm sorry. Caesar or Kesar 569, what a disgusting way to attack homosexuality and excuse pedophilia. Yeah. Left is deaf, not defending the Catholic Church, but it is actually not against church doctrine to be a gay priest, since all priests are supposed to be celibate anyway. So Candace is wrong, obviously.
Check the clip I dropped in the chat, Matt or Bradley.
That's just the church going woke.
Obviously.
Obviously.
The Pope, he's kind of on the woke side of things, right?
Soon Jesus will be black. Then what are you gonna do?
First Santa, then Jesus. ALX Charles Dukes, Justice Democrats needs to bring Cenk back into fundraise. That's his main benefit to leftists, in my opinion. He's pretty good at fundraising campaigns because he has a relatively massive leftist media network, even though he's not perfect on every issue. Yeah, I mean, that's for them to decide. Shipping address says, my personal conspiracy theory is the reason you can't watch old seasons of Survivor in Canada, even on streaming, is because there are some old residual contracts they don't want to pay for these people who are on multiple times. That is a good theory, I think. Where is Jessica Hyde? Just some perspective on the highway robbery of modern Hollywood executives. Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM during the Golden Age, was at one time the highest paid American, but he only made a fraction of what these crooks make today. Future swim shorts. Someone needs to call Jesse's mom. He clearly wasn't listening to her when she said no conspiracy theories. Yes.
I really think people need to be more Marxist about their understanding of like how high people are paid. Like any percentage that people get to take from people who work to produce things, like the writers and the actors and everybody else, every percentage that ownership gets to take it's turned on you, right? It goes towards a sort of apparatus that exists to further like repress these workers. Like they're putting it to work right now. They're sitting on these large sums of cash trying to starve out the people who earned the large sums of cash for them.
Yeah, it's about who owns the means of production.
Yeah, it's just like it's class struggle. Like it's not.
Yeah. All right, let's do this clip then that Binder sent here. So here is Brett Weinstein. This is a clip of him, I guess, on the Dark Horse podcast.
His podcast, with his with Heather or whatever her name is.
Heather Hying, sorry, not Heather Heyer. I apologize. Hying, his wife. This is a clip of Brett Weinstein finding out in real time that some of his IDW buddies, the intellectual dark web, he was one of them, are that Twitter Nazis, right wingers, far right people enjoy their content.
No way.
How incredulous can you be when you talk like this?
I had gotten, for whatever reason on Twitter, dumped into what I call Nazi Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
For some reason.
And I tweeted about it.
You call it?
Yesterday or the day before. And I got back a reaction that I was not expecting. When I say Nazi Twitter, I am talking about a part of Twitter where swastikas are not viewed as negative, where Hitler is quoted in an effort to illustrate that he is not who we were told he was. In fact, the idea that is commonly circulated in this part of Twitter is that the television is lying to you, which I'm sure it is, but that the television is lying to you, that Hitler actually was not interested in war. He was interested in peace, and that the narrative that has been created around him in the aftermath of the Holocaust and World War II is a construction of, you guessed it, Jews in Hollywood. Right? Now,
Amazing.
But then here's the crazy part.
They think I'm one of them.
That's not every account. Okay? Most of the accounts over in that land are replying there, and there are some people over there that I know, people who have actually defended us in some cases. These people are not Nazis, but they are now trafficking in a kind of sophistication or false sophistication that I know what it is because, frankly, I wrote a paper on it in college saying, here is what this impulse to genocide actually is. To watch people now trafficking in Hitlerian revisionism, including, seriously, we're talking about accounts who have been in one case, an important COVID dissident account. It's an anonymous account, so I don't know who it is, but we're talking about people who should know better.
Oh, really?
So,
because they're free thinkers.
Yeah.
And free thinking could never. No free thinker has ever been a Nazi.
Brett Weinstein.
I haven't wrote a paper on that, so I don't know if I want to be so definite.
I'll just distill this down to one thing. Brett's essentially saying, "Gosh, I love reaping, but I hate sowing."
And we were right. Us drunk pilots over here were actually right the entire time.
Yeah.
It really is so amazing to hear him go through this. I landed on Nazi Twitter, literal, actual Hitler-supporting, swastika-using Nazis. And lo and behold, a bunch of our fans are over there, but I don't believe they are the actual Nazis. They're just trafficking in the same language and beliefs as the real Nazis in Nazi Twitter. And imagine my shock when I discovered that some of these very same people share our views on COVID and vaccines. Oh my God.
I mean, this is why I brought that up, that Nazi shooter up to Tim Pool, was because them being confronted with the very reality that, like, these IDW types who pretend that they're liberals and that they're moderates, and yet they espouse right-wing talking points in order to make the far-right neo-Nazi types feel like their politics are a little closer to the mainstream than others. That is the function they serve. And so it's only a matter of time until that firewall between the people they're appealing to by pretending to be moderate and their ecosystem melts away. I mean, that's in part due to Elon Musk. But, like, Brett is one of those guys who essentially kicked off the campus wokeness thing and resigned and started his own podcast on the heels of that, saying, I'm a liberal. I support ex-liberal politician, but wow, they've gone too far, and the right wing eats that up. You can only maintain the liberal branding for so long, and eventually you're either confronted with the reality like Brett is, or you become a straight up right winger like, Dave Rubin has admitted that who he is. But this is just a tale as old as time that, like, people engage in this kind of thing, these right wing grifters. And it's just as fascinating. And two, just the connection with the COVID misinformation that he espouses. He's like, and the COVID dissidents that I respected even espousing this. Probably because a lot of COVID lab leak conspiracy theories are based in deep xenophobia about Chinese people, or in even more extreme instances, conspiracy theories about the Jews controlling the world and it being a part of, like, some sort of bioweapon from the globalists. That's the pool you guys are in. Let's not pretend.
Yeah, I find this stuff infinitely fascinating because I think in some cases it's actually, this is actually an academic failing, despite him being a professor, because he just doesn't know what a Nazi is. And that's very common in America, in the US, to be confused about what Nazism contains. And in fact, what are all of its precursors? And so I think I've noticed since I started becoming involved and interested in media, that there are a lot of people who would describe themselves as like centrist, thinkers, like free thinkers, who flirt with Nazi ideals, and that this is to separate them from the actual Nazis who aren't like swastika wearing neo-Nazis, but people who believe Nazi ideals and actively try to traffic them into rather launder them into public spheres, as though Nazism or fascism is just another type of political ideology that you have to tolerate. They use people like this who are fascinated by ideals around like race science and eugenics and other things that the United States of America was engaging in pre-Nazi, World War II, German Nazi, the Holocaust, the industrial eradication and genocide of Jewish people, and along with Roma and LGBTQ people. But we have an entire swath of thinkers who do not really understand the direct genealogy of Nazi ideas. And as a country, we have not really engaged with the ideas that led to the Holocaust or Nazism's rise in Europe. We've instead used various sorts of sloganeering to imply that that kind of thing could never happen again because it's happened once and now we're vigilant for what it looks like. When ultimately we've never really engaged with, our genocide of the native people. We don't really engage with the ways the German state and other states in Europe have decimated Africa with their colonialism. And we have, pundits who go around flirting with Charles Murray and the bell curve and phrenology and race science and the inherent criminality of certain populations. And then they get big in Nazi Twitter and they go, I don't understand why Nazis love me. I just asked all these questions that, appeal to them for some reason. I remember when Jordan Peterson was talking about the Jewish question and he was like, all my fans ask me about the Jewish question. And I tell them, it's X, Y, and Z. I mean, they put articles in the New York Times that are just about Jewish people's IQs being higher. And they do so uncritically. And it's very tempting to just be like, oh, there are a lot of neo-Nazis in control of publications, or Brett Weinstein is a secret neo-Nazi. But I think this is, again, we just have done such a poor job of explaining what led to the Holocaust and Nazism, that people find themselves reinventing the wheel without even realizing what they're doing. They find themselves reinventing eugenics and Nazism and palling around with neo-Nazis because they have a very narrow understanding of what it is and what it contains, and they don't really understand that it's changed since 1945.
Or they don't care. Or they don't care either, Brandon, because they are monetizing it. I mean, the whole IDW was this. I mean, instead of Charles Murray, it's about your inherent traits as a race. It's become, it's about culture or ideology. I mean, Sam Harris is Brett Weinstein's IDW compatriot, and that was his entire thing, which is just that Islam, based on their culture and their beliefs, is inherently more violent. That is just a more modern version of what you're talking about.
It's definitely that, and it's just the lack of reflexivity and also just the lack of intellectual curiosity to ask themselves why people are grouping them with Nazis and to look into the things that they espouse and the history and genealogy of them, because a lot of these people just aren't doing that either. They're just coming up with these ideas being enlightened by their own, ignorance in this case, but being enlightened by their own intelligence and just musing aimlessly about the roles of, race and determination in society. And then they just, because we live in a society full of precursors to Nazism, they just come away with a lot of ideas that are reminiscent of Nazism. And without any kind of intellectual curiosity or engagement with the past, we do end up in the same place a lot of times. Though they end up in the same place because they're not critical about their own biases. They're not critical about the social biases that we're indoctrinated with from birth. And this is where they end up with going damn, a lot of my fans are Nazis, but I wonder why that might be, because I could never be a Nazi or espousing Nazis' ideas, because I just wouldn't do that. No, I won't look up my ideas.
Yep. Well said, and great last minute addition, Binder. Appreciate that. Always love a good Brett.
I mean, I saw it and I was just like, apparently there's more from that episode where apparently Heather, his wife, goes on to then blame the woke for for the Nazi Twitter. But I haven't listened to the entirety of it yet. But that clip was just too amazing to watch. The in real time, one of these guys realize exactly who they're appealing to, and then really quickly trying to dig them way out, themselves out of it.
Yeah.
He seemed genuinely surprised, which I can't,
I can't imagine.
Because he's stupid.
Well,
he is. That's stupid. The thing. Some of these guys, just we might want to give them the credit of being really strategic and really good at pretending that they're not aware of this stuff sometimes. But for some of them, it's just, quite frankly, they actually aren't aware because they're just dumb.
He's fooled by his own false sophistication.
Yeah, I mean, how many people have hundreds of thousands of people have taught at higher education facilities, many longer than his short, brief moment that I think you look into people talking about it at the same time, maybe not the greatest scholar, not a huge actual academic footprint. He's a moron.
Yeah. He just found a way to monetize having like an NPR voice, but saying right-wing crap. All right, guys, we won't have any more time for calls today, so hanging up. Apologies. Going to read some IMs and we'll get out of here. Chicago letter carrier. Tim Pool says 1 million Hispanic Nazis can't be wrong. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
People get in their own heads when they make jokes like that, I think, sometimes.
Wow.
I mean, Tim Pool doesn't... He doesn't... They didn't think Latinos could be Nazis, right?
I don't know. Violator child. Germany systematically went through the process of denazification. The U.S. simply imported some more Nazis and pretended they were never here. Charlie Sheeher, Brandon on point about not learning how the Holocaust happened. We're seeing a great example of that now with how many right-wing groups are using anti-LGBTQ rhetoric to get in power. Some of it could be straight up lifted from Nazi propaganda. All that purity of youth crap is such a retread and was a toe in the door for the worst back then, too.
The Nazis went after trans people. That's one of the first groups.
Yeah. Chicago letter carrier said, Matt, you couldn't just said it was funny. Laughing my ass off. Ouch.
What was funny?
A joke that I didn't get earlier about the 1 million Latinos.
Oh, it wasn't funny.
We love you, Chicago letter carrier.
Yeah, I don't know
we're
what
just
you're talking
confused. Dave from Jamaica. Dark Horse needs to change to Clueless Horse or Horse in the Dark. Fart Twain says, it's awesome to see Sam picketing with SAG-AFTRA. I love his last Twitter picture that's out of focus and his face is a bit cut off. It reminds you his age. Yeah. Kowalski, the Protestant communities have no room to talk when it comes to child abuse, and they are the primary enablers of child marriage in this country. Right. Also, the fetishization of youth and innocence seems like the foundation to build an abusive society that would outwardly rage against pedophilia but close ranks if it is within the community. Well said. Well said. Rob from PLS, or MPLS. I wore a Bernie shirt traveling through Bob Hope Airport in Palm Springs a couple of years ago. More than once, I was stopped by strangers concerned for my safety.
Really? I flew into Bob Hope when I did the LA show. Long ass ways away from downtown LA, I found out.
Yeah. Data, I think it's the best one they've ever done. Oh, some more news. That's what it was in reference to. Dave from Jamaica. Brandon, you are correct. People are very unwilling to deal with what the Nazis were, like they were a one-time event. All right, 5 more. Tim Fan 1, Thursday crew millennials afraid to debate a true alpha male on their home turf. Call in tomorrow. Sorry about that. Space London, did you see the beautiful Seahawks throwbacks? No, I did not. I'm pretty like old school in that I prefer classic uniforms. I don't love the Nikeification of the NFL. I think the Colts uniforms are trash. The new ones that just came out. But they want to sell more different jerseys. That's what it is. I think the ones that are classic, the Raiders, the Dallas Cowboys, the Green Bay Packers, they don't feel the need to do these gimmicks, and I appreciate that, honestly. And the Colts I thought were up there, but they've decided to do this, which is not a fan. Lefty band teacher singing my favorite atheist tune. Tim Haggard is completely heterosexual. Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual. Ted Haggard is completely heterosexual. Bernie Bot 3000. It's crazy to me that Ben simultaneously describes Trump as an agent of pure chaos that can't be dealt with, but logically, and also supports voting for him and defending him. I want to believe contradictions like this are tearing the right apart, but I know that's how most of their logic works anyway.
Yeah, no, it's how it's always been.
Yeah. Meaningless poll. Below Deck Sailing Yacht just aired a Cap reunion to a 3-season romance arc. As enjoyable as any other TV, they are absolutely worthy of being better compensation and access to residuals. Below Deck is a reality show. And the final I am of the day Says, justice for Hugo. Speaking of Weinstein, I think we all remember how despicable Harvey Weinstein was, but I always get him confused with Ryan Kavanaugh. Thankfully, there's a website that helps you see the difference. Does Ryan Kavanaugh look like HarveyWeinstein.com? All right, that won't be...
Do we have another one?
All right, yeah, that's not going to be the final. That's not the final I am. I want to end on... I don't know what that even is a reference to.
The CEO of Relativity Media.
I don't know what that is.
I'm trying
Maybe
to
they're
find...
confused by the Supreme Court justice, who's Brett Kavanaugh.
People are skipping steps in their
joke construction.
Joking, like
jokes have a setup and a punchline.
Yeah, we're missing like the 8 premises.
And then, all right, this is the final I am of the day. This is substantive and related to my interview from the first hour. Fun with the Finns says, just briefly on the Social Democrats losing the election in Finland. They actually got more votes and gained 3 more seats than last time. One big reason the National Coalition Party got to form the government with the Finns was that most Marin coalition parties lost a lot of seats. Okay, gotcha. So it was the smaller coalition parties with the center-left party that did this. The Center Party lost 8, most of which went to the Finns, while the Greens and the Left Alliance lost seats to the Social Democrats. In my opinion, Marin did a good job with both the COVID crisis and the Ukraine war happening on her watch and got us into NATO. A shame, really, that she didn't get a second term. Instead, we have a far-right mess with a new crisis every week. Anyway, great interview. Left his best. Thank you for the extra context. Fun with the Finn. Brandon, Matt, Leck, Bradley. Awesome stuff. Appreciate you all. We will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive